In this episode, I talk to Dr Tim Cox, educational psychologist working as an EP near Newcastle and also a tutor on the Newcastle Doctorate Training Programme. Many of you will know Tim, or at least might recognise his voice from the podcast Agents of Hope, which started in 2020, where Tim and colleagues recorded and published 33 conversations with many interesting people, including some colleagues he was sitting right next to at work, and also some familiar names to many, like John Hattie, Joe Elliott, Kathy Atkinson, Francesca Nagel, to name just a few. We discuss Tim's work to clarify the EP role, which led him to hope theory, and we take a pretty deep dive into how he's developed his thinking around hope into 5 dimensions of hope. We also touch on many other things, including challenges of work-life balance. The conversation was rich, and so at a couple of points I've inserted some of my own retrospective reflections in the hope they might support some of your own too. The video version on YouTube has some visuals to aid understanding as well, and as usual, your thoughts and feedback are very welcome. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Tim Cox. So really grateful to you for being on here today, and it's fantastic to get to actually have a conversation with you and a bit of a chat.
That's no problem. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a while since I've done this sort of format, so I might be a little rusty, but we'll see.
Oh, not at all. Okay, so to start us off, I wondered if you might just take us down a bit of a historical journey, go back a few years, and maybe just set the scene, a bit of an insight into how things were feeling for you when you started the podcast. So going back to 2019 or 2020, and tell us a bit about your story at the time, how you're feeling and how that kind of started, how you got into that would be really interesting to hear a little bit about.
It's quite a long history, really, of really me trying to work out what educational psychology was about in my head, and that's a big focus of the Newcastle doctoral course, is to really think about values and to think about how they relate to the work we do and what underpins those things. And I came from a career experience where I'd never worked alongside an educational psychologist a couple of times, but I hadn't worked as an assistant psychologist. I didn't really know what an educational psychology service would do day to day. So when I became a trainee, it was all new and it was quite overwhelming. And I was trying to work out what is the unique contribution of an educational psychologist and why would an education psychologist get involved, and ultimately how an education psychologist would explain what they were doing in a way that's understandable to people who are interested that we can help and want the work that we do to be psychologically sound, but aren't involved in the philosophical debates about whether we should do things with individuals or whether we should do things systemically, whether we should be assessment driven or whether we should be consultation driven or anything else along that spectrum. And for me, it felt there was something else going on when I'd been to shadow educational psychologists and done work myself, is that there was something difficult to define, but underpinning lots of the work that I'd seen, regardless of who it was that I was working with or shadowing and what context they were working in. Because we work with we work with children and their families from birth till the day they turn 26, and sometimes beyond that. So what are we doing? What is the key concept that's there? And I tried to drill down as I was in this sort of washing machine of philosophical and professional development, which was the first year of the course, and really came to the idea that really at the bottom of most things that I'd seen, there was hope. There was trying to make things better for the young person, the child or the family, so that they would engage in education that would benefit them and thrive, help them to thrive going on. So in my second year on the course, I did loads of research into, is there a psychology of hope? And came across hope theory, which is, I guess, you put that in the positive psychology stable. And then thought about how does this relate to being an educational psychologist? So I wrote a paper about that off the back of some of the portfolio reflections that I did. That got published. And then I went and spoke at the TEP conference, and so the trainee conference and the educational psychology conference that year, and discussed my paper. And that was around January, February time. And then March came along, as did the COVID-19 pandemic. And I was supposed to be doing my thesis. I thought, how can I procrastinate? So I said, I'm not sure if anybody's read the thing that I've just poured the last 2 years into. Let's try and have some conversations about it. So I just put out on Twitter, as it was then, is anybody interested in discussing their practice through the prism of hope as an idea? And I got five people who were willing to talk to me. And I think it was Joe Taylor, Mark Adams, Jagdish Bhawan, Colin Newton, and Amelia Taylor. And over the next 4 weeks or something, I recorded all of those conversations and just put them out because I thought, well, it's interesting to have long form conversations about this. And I don't think anybody else is doing that at that moment. And I thought this might help people who are interested in training and understanding what an EP would do, who didn't know what an EP would do, like I was in my first year. And then it exploded from then, really. And it became more popular than I thought it might do. And then I ended up, over the next 18 months, putting together about 25 episodes myself, and then providing the platform for Nazam Hussain and Ella Mansfield. I had a variety of other EPs and trainees to go out and do their own little mini-series around the broad concept of hopeful practice. And they were able to bring in other people like John Hetty and people like that. So it's something that's got me into lots of conversations with people who I would never imagine having those conversations with, and have really positive conversations and hopefully develop some sense of hope initially during COVID, which was difficult. And then post-COVID, when we've gone back to a context which is very different educationally, at least in England, and share these ideas where educational psychologists are able to apply psychology in a hopeful way that helps them to engage in their work and helps the people that we're serving. I've probably spoke about 6 minutes there, but that's pretty much the plotted history.
Oh, amazing. I'm not keeping track of the time. Yeah, lots of other avenues I'd love to go down. I'd love, if you don't mind, soon a bit of an explanation of hope theory, just for people who've maybe not come across it before, and how you're conceptualizing that. But first, just to go back a little bit and to say thanks for the podcast, because I remember as a practitioner listening to podcasts, but when I was in practice, before I moved to this job, there weren't any EP related podcasts that I had found. So I felt I was learning a lot. It was, in many ways, it was my main form of CPD, but also feeling a slight sense of, is this okay? Because it wasn't directly about EP practice. And often it was, podcasts that were from America, really interesting. Some of them from other areas of psychology, or about personal development and that kind of thing, and getting a lot from them. Finding podcasts a really welcome way to learn, because they include, say, long form conversation and a bit of nuance and ways for people to explore ideas. But at that time, there wasn't an EdPsych one that I had found anyway that was UK based. And I think one of the first ones I listened to was with Amelia Taylor on polyvagal theory. And I remember thinking, this is really interesting. There are other EPs out there who are wondering about similar things to what I am. And it just allowed a bit of a sense of community, a bit of a sense of connection to other EPs in the UK. It was actually a trainee who came to me to tell me that there was this podcast about EP practice. And it was quite exciting at the time, and still is actually. So yeah, just thanks for bringing that in.
No problem.
Because I think it's made a difference.
Yeah. I think it's an underdeveloped, probably, way of educational psychologists across the UK connecting with each other, because although we're very relational in our approach, it can be sometimes that we don't get the time to spend and think about the ideas of other people unless there's time made for that. And Amelia's a really good example. I sat next to Amelia in my office at North Burnside, but we'd never talked about why we do the things that we do, and never looked at that sort of the Venn diagram of Amelia's approach to resilience, which is
Yeah.
largely within person. And then my worldview, which is about, I guess, a more ecological approach to that. But her approach really helped me to understand her journey, of why she takes that approach and why it's important to her as a person. And then how I could integrate elements of that into my practice. And really, there's a sense of when you're reading it on paper or you're accessing a journal, which aren't accessible to everybody, you don't get the time to ask why they're thinking that. Usually it's, do I get the language they're speaking in or not? And kind of make sense of this. Whereas if you listen to somebody or two people talk about something for an hour and a half, you get a bit of a chance to listen to the space between them about, usually when I was doing the podcast, I don't know that much about this. Can you explain it to me as if I don't know that much about it?
Yeah.
And then you get an interesting dynamic there. It's not an article where it's just telling you what somebody's done. It's not a lecture where you get a bit of back and forth, but not very much. It's a real conversation. And I think
Yeah.
that's where that is a lot of what psychologists do, is they talk to people. So why don't we have more things where it's a record of people talking to each other and the listener can make that critical decision about whether they align with what people are saying or whether they're not. But it provides at least a conversation about it. And I think it's really exciting, and it's good. There's 4 or 5 now podcasts, alternative media things, which which were happening at the same time as Agents of Hope. But it feels like now there's a more cohesive sense of a range of medias that families, prospective trainees, EPs, teachers could all listen to and get an idea of what people think, what people do,
Yeah.
and whether they align with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll try and include some of the links in the notes as well for those
Mhm.
too. Because, yeah, as you say, it seems like there's more now, which is really good. I think any opportunity to come up against, alongside other EPs' ideas and thoughts, it's a good opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the other thing that was interesting about the podcast is the name. So Agents of Hope. So that makes sense given how you've explained
Mhm.
how it came about and everything. And as EPs, we quite often hear the terms agents of change. So that was quite a clever kind of, it stopped you in your automatic thinking track to think, this is
Mhm. Mhm.
interesting. Agents of Hope instead of agents of change. And so for those who maybe are unfamiliar with hope theory and what that means to you at least, I wonder if you could give a little explanation of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think I guess agents of change is where that idea came from, really. But really, I think there's a subtle, but I think it's an important
Mhm.
difference between that. I think that
Yeah.
change is always happening anyway, and we can be agents of that, but it's not necessarily good or bad. And who decides whether it's good or bad? It's not clear with that. But I think that hope is at the core of the education system and the core of human development, in terms of, Erickson talks about the first virtue that you develop is hope, that the the ability to state what you want and receive it. And that's kind of at the kind of fundaments of those really attachment relationships, is the ability basically of your parents to get what you want and for you to get it. And you learn different ways to communicate more precisely as you develop what you want. I think there's something fundamental about how people are positioned and what they're positioned towards. Uh, Really, if you think about Roger's idea of the ideal life and the ideal self and self concept being positioned, you've got an idea of who you are and who you'd like to be, and then you've got patterns of behavior that bring you more towards who you'd like to be in the future. So the sense of what is and what should be. I feel that often we're working towards that. And the education system's a lot like that as well. Of, we have children, we'd like them to develop into good citizens and people who can read and write, and people who can make a contribution to their community through work and other kind of social activities. And school provides lots of opportunities to do that. So there is a hopefulness there. And I think that's laudable, although people disagree on how successful it is or how we should be doing it. And I guess that's why I thought, okay, if there is a hope somewhere in the mix. I need to go look at psychology. My tutor at the time, Wilma Barrow, gave me this enormous book of positive psychology. It was absolutely like proper academics book, and
Yeah.
said, look at hope theory. And hope theory was wonderfully simple for me to understand, but it seemed to be like I can't argue with it. What Charles Snyder in the 90s and early noughties was doing research around the concept of hope for a positive psychology sort of approach. And he argued that he even had an equation for it. So he said hope equals pathway thinking, which is like the strategies that you have towards a particular task, plus agency towards a goal oriented activity. So you've got a goal, you've got a number of strategies that you might employ towards that goal, and you have how confident you feel, and that altogether equals hopefulness. And I go,
Okay.
okay,
Yep.
yeah, okay, that definitely works as a
Hmm.
cognitive framework. And then whilst I was in consultations and assessments and interventions, I was thinking, okay, does this person have a goal? How many different ways can they think to hit that goal? Do they feel confident? And what's the emotional feedback loops that are helping to develop the pathway thinking, the agency, really? And at a really simple thing, I often went into situations which felt stuck, and the role of myself could be to set a goal. You have people who really, they have lots of agency about being able to do things, and they have expertise in their own lives, but they don't know what to do next. And helping people to define that was really powerful. So I thought, okay, this is really good. The downsides of hope theory is that it's highly rational. So there's no sense
Okay.
of felt hope. It's just if you are good at pathway thinking, if you're a confident person, and if you're good at goal setting, you are a high hope individual. If you're not very good at those things, you're a low hope individual. And I felt that doesn't sit right. And in that not sitting right, so there must be an emotional kind of sense of hope. Like I could, if you put me in front of a group of people and said, Tim, talk about hope theory, I feel really hopeful. I could do that. I could do that and I will do it. But if you said, Tim, go and play a 90-minute football match, immediately it's like, I could do it, but I'm asthmatic. I haven't played football for about 5 years. Like, I don't hope, I'd have to be very hopeful to think that would go well. And actually, would I be able to see it through? I don't know. So there feels like there's an ecological sense of you look at your context, and that helps you have an immediate knee-jerk reaction to, oh, I could do that, or I will do that, or be able to, or I can't do that. And you
Okay.
see that quite quickly if you're talking to somebody and you're setting goals with them, whether you can see it in their body language and it happens before they verbalized it. And really that's about, we like to think of ourselves as highly rational beings. We like to think ourselves as the enlightened, rational dog with the emotional tail. But I think it's actually the other way around. We're emotional dogs, and then we ration out from our emotions. So I thought we need to develop a sense of emotion as well as there being a cognitive thing. I don't think one's wrong and one's right. It's just you've got to work together with those. And then over time, through the conversations I've had on the podcast and in my professional practice, I've developed a 5 dimensions of hope beyond those 2 dimensions, where I've added hope as a virtue. So hope being seen as a good thing within a particular context, and hope as a transcendent or meaning making thing. So there's something about long-term goals, long-term dreams, or changing somebody's circumstances through hopeful action. So there's 4. And then I think gluing them all together is relational hope. And there's quite a
Okay.
lot of research in all of those 5 areas. And I think you can bring those together within educational psychology to say, if you're doing anything that's goal oriented or hope oriented, it's good to
Hmm.
think about those 5 different areas. And you might not be able to hit all 5 of them at one time, but it's a kind of, if I was going to put belt and braces on a goal oriented action, thinking about where the hope sits in each of those 5 areas would be a good idea.
Okay, so help me out a little bit here, because that was a load of rich information and I'm keen that we
Yeah.
get into the specifics if we can. The five, I can't remember what you called them, five principles,
Dimensions. Dimensions
dimensions,
of,
sorry, yeah, that you've developed as a result of trying to formulate something that feels more relevant for EP practice,
I think it's more ecologically sound, really.
ecologically sound, right? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So because when I was reading a bit, so I had a wee read of your paper and I think it's really
Hmm.
interesting. And it's funny, isn't it, when you start to think about, yeah, what does underpin all of our practice? Hope has such a central, I mean, it's why
Hmm.
we do it, isn't it? Has such
Yeah.
a central place and everything. But can I just check before we go on the five dimensions that you were talking about?
Yeah. So in the paper, I'm talking about how you just look at hope theory. The 5 dimensions is something slightly different from
Okay.
that. Okay.
So, as you can maybe tell, I noticed I was getting a bit confused at this point about what Snyder's hope theory proposes in Tim's paper and where that fits with Tim's 5 dimensions of hope that he has developed. So, in Snyder's hope theory, he talks of two kinds of hope thoughts that are needed to develop hope and to influence someone taking action towards their goal in a hopeful way. The first is pathways thinking, which I now understand as being able to consider a range of strategies or possible pathways towards whatever the goal might be. And the ability to do that supports an individual to be hopeful. The second kind of hope thought is agency thinking or agency thoughts, which relate to whether someone believes that achieving the goal via their strategy or pathway is possible. Another aspect of Snyder's theory is the emotion set, and that results from these two variables, so pathways thoughts and agency thoughts, which could be something of a feedback loop to support further development of pathways thoughts and agencies thoughts. So I'm sharing that in case it is helpful for you too. Tim's observations of the limits of hope theory and these elements within it is that more than these elements are needed to facilitate hopeful goal direction because these hope thoughts and emotion set associated with it do not give adequate consideration to the impact of a hopeful or not hopeful community and environment of the child and young person. So, as a result, he has developed hope theory into a more ecological model, which he calls the 5 dimensions of hope. We cover what they are again in a minute, and that perhaps Snyder's pathways thinking and agency thinking sits mostly within his first and second dimensions within his 5 dimensions, possibly hope as a cognitive framework and maybe as an emotional experience. But see what you think.
So
Yeah,
the 5 dimensions would be hope as an emotional experience,
yeah,
then hope as a cognitive framework, which would be hope theory,
yeah.
hopeful relationships, hope as a virtue in a community, and then hope as a meaning making activity.
Got you.
So I've developed my thinking slightly further on from
Great.
that paper. But really, in the paper, I talk about this is a pragmatic in terms of it's psychologically sound and it's
Yeah.
helpful to people. And it's a good way to introduce yourself as a psychologist. Say, I hope to make things more hopeful here. And you could do that by helping people to set goals, to developing their
Hmm.
ability to have a range of strategies to go towards a goal, to think about the emotional feedback loops that develop
Yeah.
that kind of hope, and then having ripples of hope as a kind of systemic idea is that if this is the habit that we form as educational providers, is that we're going to think about the individual and what they want from their life, and then help those activities that happen at school to be predictably and explicitly hopeful, then that changes somebody's concept of what school might be about.
Yeah. Yeah. Their orientation towards it as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the 5 dimensions that you've put together, do you still see the pathways and agency, or does that shift a little bit?
Yeah. So I think that hope theory still has a big part to play because it's a bit like
Yeah.
if you were going to lift up the hood of hope, the
Yeah.
bonnet of hope, and see what is going on mechanically, like a map
Yeah.
or a
Yeah.
sort
Okay.
of diagram, then yeah, you do want people to have a range of strategies. They want way power. That's what Snyder calls it. The ability to
Okay.
think creatively about how you might get towards a goal. And you want them to develop confidence, and you want them to be able to have a goal. But what I would say is that's not the start and the end of it.
Hmm.
You've got to want to be it. You want to. So the difference between, I guess, self-efficacy and hope is self-efficacy is I can do that. And hope is I will persist in doing that.
Okay.
That's a fundamental difference. So it's the will to carry on. So there's got to be an emotional drive for it.
Motivation. Yeah.
If you're in a community which goes, yeah, that's brilliant, please keep doing that, then you're going to get loads of feedback that says, yeah, keep going. If you're in a community which doesn't quite get it, you probably need somebody to advocate for you to say, this is a good thing. And also, if it's got like some sort of transcendent meaning to you. So, for example, if I go into school and say, what's your dream to a year 7 child who's having trouble managing schools? I want to be a mechanic. And that's what keeps me going. It's, okay, so how do we make sense of the hope-based stuff that you're doing in school, like a maths lesson or a history lesson or a French lesson, and make that relevant to that big goal?
Yeah. Okay.
You have to do that explicitly. You have to do that you have to think about that from the individual's perspective and help them give that feedback around that. So it's just these things will help you to do X, Y, and Z towards those goals. And therefore, rather than being boring obligations, which are just opportunities to get in trouble, they are then actually opportunities for you to develop how you build relationships, how many different types of markets you could go into as a mechanic, all of those different things, and to make sure that those feedback loops that come from goal attainment or non-attainment are correctly focused so they're meaningful to the young person, if that
Yeah.
makes
Yeah.
sense. And often people haven't asked that question, what would make school meaningful? And for me, it's the individual young person who decides that. And I think asking those questions about what do you hope to achieve? What's the big goal? How can we get everybody behind you is really important. And for me, relationships are the way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. The connections and things. Yeah. And I liked how you described it as creative thinking, I think you said, around what different pathways might look like. And I think that's just really quite helpful. So I would tend to think about what next steps might make sense or that kind of thing. But I think just describing something like that as pathways immediately suggests that there's probably more than one way to do this. And
Mhm.
let's just be a bit creative and a bit exploratory around what different ways might look like and where each of them maybe has different strengths or limitations to it. But there's likely multiple ways. And let's just think about what might that look like. But I think even the word hope, like visually in my mind, it's like space in front of me.
Mhm.
That maybe sounds very bizarre, but how I visualize it, it's something ahead. It's something forward facing, which is
Yeah.
actually, it's really helpful to be reminded of it, whether it's through the word hope or something else.
And
Yeah.
can we get everybody on board with that? Is there a common good in there? And that's a
Yeah.
very different question from what's the problem? How do we fix it? What's the journey we want to go on together that will make this young person, this group of young people, or this system better in 5 years?
Yeah.
And it's a slight reorientation. Sometimes I'm thinking, am I doing the Emperor's New Clothes things here? But I think there's
Yeah.
something important about the language in which we use in order to um, practice and develop our self-concept and all of those sort of things.
So, as I was listening to Tim, I noticed my brain wondering how hope theory and Tim's development of that into the 5 dimensions of hope related to or could be integrated with other theories and frameworks that EPs and others in education use. I wish I'd asked him about them at the time, but I'm sharing my curiosities here in the hope that it's helpful for you to reflect on too. The first potential link I was thinking about was with theories of motivation. So, specifically, an old theory, expectancy value theory, came to mind. And that also has a simple equation to it, something like motivation equals the likelihood of success. So, how likely a person thinks that they can achieve something, multiplied by the relevance of the task. And that's about how much they actually want to achieve it. Is it a task that is of interest to them? Do they care about it in the first place? And those two, likelihood of success and relevance of the task, are needed for someone to feel motivated. So that's a specific example. But I wonder about other theories of motivation too, like self-determination theory. I know we mentioned self-efficacy. And from an earlier and brief chat we had before the recording, I remember Tim mentioning a colleague who had some critique of self-determination theory. So I'm curious about that too, and where it may or may not fit, and what his view on that is. I'm also aware that each of these theories I'm mentioning have a strong history of being developed in Western cultures, and we need to think about that too. In hindsight, I think expectancy value theory at least might relate most directly to the first two dimensions Tim speaks of, which are hope as an emotional experience and hope as a cognitive framework. In that way, the 5 dimensions of hope do allow broader consideration of the external factors that might influence someone's behaviour, such as how hopeful the community is, how much hope is being seen as something to create meaning for a person, and how the relationships are for a child or young person too, whether they are supporting hope or not. The other thing I'd wondered about was which interventions or development activities EPs might be involved with and how those encompass the 5 dimensions of hope. So Tim goes on to talk about person-centered planning and the PATH version of that specifically, so planning alternative tomorrows with hope, PATH, as an example, and also says that there are a range of other ways to support the 5 dimensions. I was wondering about apprenticeship models of supporting children and young people's self-regulation towards a goal or task. That's also quite goal-oriented. And I think that would support the 5 dimensions, including the importance of feedback loops to support someone to develop hopefulness as they receive information, data, feedback, whatever you want to call it, on how their efforts have played out. So reflecting on these has helped me think of the 5 dimensions as an overarching pragmatic model, or even a set of fundamental principles to underpin EP practice and education systems. As Tim goes on to say, there are a range of practical tools or methods that can support the 5 dimensions of hope. I would be interested in, and I'm sure Tim would as well, what you think about these 5 dimensions, Tim's reflections, my reflections, other theories or frameworks that it gets you thinking about, and how that thinking aligns and where it is different, and any limitations that you can see that we have not discussed too. So please let us know what you think. Great. Okay. So I know you've touched on bits there, but if you were, and I know in your paper you speak of how it has helped inform your practice at kind of casework level as well as systemic level with schools. I wondered if you could give a couple of examples or maybe some scenarios or situations that you might be able to tell us about.
There's lots of frameworks that you could use to bring it to life.
Yeah.
Often I use the planning alternative tomorrows with hope as a framework and tend to talk to all the people involved, whether that be school staff, parents, child or young person, and say, I really want to bring some hope into this situation because it feels really difficult. So what I often do is, the thing I really love about PATH or planning alternatives to hope is that you start with talking about the dream. So if I was going to put that onto my framework, that would be meaning making hope, the 5th dimension.
Okay.
And I'd be saying, okay, for the young person, what is the dream? What would you like from your life? What would your relationships be like? What would your activities? What would you be doing? Where would you be living? What values would you be holding? And if you get a rich picture of that, and then you could offer that out to the people around the room, often there's a lot of overlap. It's very reasonable to have a dream. And it's from the feeling of, often when you're coming into situations, education psychology, things feel stuck. And people can feel a bit tense around each other, and school have the next steps that they would usually take. And the family, if we've been down that road so many times. And there's a kind of a lack of orientation in how they communicate. And what it can become is very service-centered. So this is the thing that the system needs us to do. And the family going, but will that actually help? And where's it going? Because if it's going to just conformity, then we're stuck now. It's probably because it's difficult to conform at this point. So by starting with the dream, that can help people to really understand the big why for this young person of why we're doing something. And then it goes very quickly into kind of goal setting, but in the long term. So what if that's a dream, what can everybody around the table agree would be good goals to set for the next year so that we've got some orientation there? So
Yeah.
going quickly into Snyder's hope theory, that's the goal. And by doing it, by having a couple of different time frames, you're able to say, this is a big goal that we'd like to achieve. And that might have, if that was the only thing we're doing, you might have an emotional reaction saying that's never going to happen. But you're saying, but this is what we'd like to achieve because it's relevant to the dream. So
Yeah.
you're making that coherence for the young person of we're doing this because we want to help you towards your dream, not because we need you just to conform. So it's about making things feel more coherent. And then you have different things where you go, what's happening now? And some of that might be positives. So you're getting a sense of with the positives, where do they feel agentic? What strategies do they have? So you're auditing pathways and the agency really, and where they've set goals and followed through. So you're starting to knit a new story of, okay, this person might be finding school difficult, but they do all this stuff outside of school or maybe in parts of school which show that they're capable and they're willing to do things if the context is right. And then you have that kind of more problem-focused discussion where saying whether these things are difficult, and that might lead to a conversation of, do we know why they're difficult? Is there an assessment that could help us to be more clear about that, which would then give you more information about how you would, so dynamic assessment might give you information about different intervention types that would support development and all of those sort of things. So that can give EPs a real insight into what might really help in this situation and how could it help the young person develop it towards something that's really good in their life rather than seeing the child as the problem. And then, okay, what's the support network? And when you're talking about support network, you're really talking about in what community am I encouraged? So a good hopeful relationships is where you're encouraged. You're seen realistically as somebody who has flaws and needs to develop, but you're encouraged along the pathways that get you towards development, not judged because you're not performing to age-related expectations. You're seen as like, these things are good. And the young person will have a very intuitive sense of who does that for them. Is it a key worker they have? Is it a particular teacher? Is it a group of friends? Is it a sports coach? They'll have a sense of who can do that. And therefore you start to map on these different dimensions of where things are going well and how you can have a continuation, but with a new orientation, which is more hopeful. And then you're trying to get people to sign up to, will you see what this young person is doing? It might be slightly left field, but it's virtuous because it's going to lead to this young person feeling more included, them contributing something to the community then feel that the community values them. So then you're saying, okay, so you're developing the sense of virtuous hope. You're exposing it and saying, this is good. Unless they're saying, I want to beat everybody up. Most things that we're doing will be virtuous to some degree. And then you have the sort of problem solving. What are your main challenges? How can this group of people help you to get through those challenges? Which then you're saying, okay, this is how relationship can help you to stop tripping up on your own flaws that everybody has and to join you in that journey. And then then you can set shorter term targets to get that momentum going. And really, so what I like to think of it is like you develop a habit of hope, not only for the young person, because the hope psychology suggests that what hopeful people are self-scaffolding. So they'll find ways to get towards their goals and be independent in doing that. But you've got to be scaffolded in the right way in order to do that. So this sets that in motion in a very coherent way, which the young person has a big part in co-producing there. And hopefully what the young person says, okay, so I got towards my dream by doing some smaller goals. What else can I do? If I can do that, then the world opens up. Likewise, there's a sort of parallel process with that of school staff or the family saying, oh, we didn't have that success before. And maybe it's because our goals are too big, or we were saying, do this or else. Like that didn't work, but this approach can really get us alongside somebody. And could we do this? Oh, there's this other young person who is having difficulties like this. Could we transplant this approach? And therefore, I become less central and yes, less needed. The whole system becomes more hopeful. So it's a positive cycle then, is that.
Yeah, it kind of spreads out, doesn't it?
And therefore, like hope theory is really central to that. But within the ecology, you need to think about a few other things to make sure that it lines up for the young person and it's
Yeah.
not falling at the first hurdle. You can do that with systems and staff and all of those sort of things. But really, it's about the individual finding, this is something I wanted to do. I learned to do it. Now, what else can I do? And that's the habit of hope, is that it's.
The habit of hope. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's like training that muscle of hope, isn't it? Maybe for those who are not naturally by default coming through, working through the world in that way, but giving people opportunity to think about that and get practice of developing a skill of, okay, this is what it feels like. What about if there was to be a small win, or what would that look like? And that can feed that hope muscle to become a bit more part of how that person goes about their life.
Yeah.
And it might be seen as something that happens by osmosis. Just by in life, we should be hopeful, but it's certainly not always the case, and could do with some explicit support, I think.
Yeah. If I think back to my secondary education, I really lost focus on it in years 10 and 11 because the teachers became less encouraging and more focused on how you're doing an assessment.
Right.
And then I remember in my first week of sixth form, which I scraped into, my tutor, she was called Mrs. Seam, and she sat down and said, oh, you're doing this thing outside school. That's really cool. But I'd really love to hear more about that. Tell me about what skills you use to do that. Oh, I've been encouraged again. This is like rocket fuel to my engagement in school. And then it changed my view on school completely. And it's a really small intervention to be interested in someone beyond their performance on a particular curriculum.
Yeah. To have someone show interest in you and what you're doing and what you might be interested in doing in the future is so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a little bit of feedback, isn't it? Seeing you, hearing you, and interested in.
I think sometimes we can lose your way with that. It's kind of part of the adolescent narrative is you're out on your own and you find your tribe, but you don't. And there's a kind of wrestle with disengagement at that point. But I think if you can go and talk in your practice and your teaching or however you're engaged with young people and be encouraging and saying, look, what you're trying to do, what you're finding difficult, can I help in any way to help you become more competent? Then that's really good.
Yeah. And it's such a simple thing that we can probably all plop into our days of just in our interactions with people, just having a narrower focus on showing interest, showing attunement, and all of that kind of connection and things with people. It can really make a difference. I think we don't always think about it that way, but it really can.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things I've wondered about, because I really like person-centered planning and paths and maps and things. When you're talking about helping young people set goals, something I've often wondered about is the before and after of person-centered planning or paths, that kind of thing. And thinking about how we can meaningfully engage children and young people so that it doesn't just feel tokenistic, or that we're sat in a room and everyone's got lots of great ideas and then we go away and the feedback looks that you're talking about, or the next steps. My concern, or it has been in practice, that I hope that didn't feel tokenistic, or I hope that's actually had some real meaning to it. So I'm exploring a few things, I suppose, as I'm talking. One is Do you ever engage with, I suppose what I'm wondering about is like a process of readiness, for want of a better word, going into those first meetings or first discussions, whether it's path or something else?
Mhm.
How much interaction or opportunity has a child or young person had before that to have their real opinions or their real participation in their situation explored before that? I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that.
Yeah, no, I think so. There's a couple of things in the literature around what's good hope
Yeah.
and what's wishful thinking and what's willful thinking. That's
Okay.
helpful to
Yeah.
think about.
Yeah.
So I'll start with the things that aren't hope but look like hope.
Great. Yeah. Thanks.
Wishful thinking is where there's a definite goal in mind, but you're too reliant on the agency of other people to do it for you. So you don't actually develop the thing. You're not scaffolded, somebody else is doing it for you. And therefore you don't develop developmental skills that help you to do your life, which I guess there's a lot of conversation about, like Velcro one-to-one teaching assistants doing the work for the young person so they stay afloat in the sort of average related expectation curriculum, which is quite a dominant narrative really in the English system. So that's wishful thinking. So you've got a goal, but you're too reliant on other people to do it for you. Willful thinking is like hope at gunpoint. So
Okay.
you develop this or we're going to exclude you. That's
Okay.
too much pressure. It's too
Yeah.
much pressure. Failure has got to be part of the hope loop. If you fail, it's because the goal's too big or there's too much pressure. So how could we bring that into alignment so you're in the zone of proximal development, essentially?
Mm-hmm.
So it's working out where people are with that. And you might not do a path first. That might be 18 months into working around a young person. But if you've got a sense of their concept of themselves, maybe you've done some academic assessment with them about where they're at, you get a general sense of them, then you're able to talk to them about hopeful endeavor in a way that isn't toxically positive, which isn't just
Okay.
cheerleading, going, you're going to do great. And then they fail at whatever you've suggested. And then they feel he was wrong. And he really pumped me up to fail. And now I feel like a complete idiot. And you're then in that emotional bit of hope where it's just, I can't do that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What you need to have is something that somebody feels they could do with some help.
Yeah.
So it's come to that kind of Vygotskian idea
Yeah.
of they could do it with some help and it's just outside their ability range. But through doing it, they learn how to do that and their strategies increase and their agency increases. And people are going, yeah, that's good. What's the next? And it really, part of the discipline of it is differentiating to that point, not allowing people just to achieve, but it doesn't really help developmentally towards where they're going. It's not an empty source of positive feedback.
Yeah.
People thought that was good. And so did I, because it helped me to see my life in a different way. Obviously, you'd have to be precise about how you did that with different age groups and different ability ranges. And if the young person has got difficulties with executive functioning, which goal setting is part of, then maybe it's let's develop goal setting before we talk about the dream. Because otherwise, that's the innate resource which is required to do that thing. You need to have some time developing that before we go too heavy on what's the dream, what you want to do, all of
Yeah.
those sort of things. And that's why I think the 5 dimensions hope is helpful because it provides a number of things to do whilst you're developing maybe the cognitive framework of hope.
Yeah, and no doubt I will think of many other questions after this, and I've scribbled lots of notes down. But just moving us on a little bit, obviously, hope theory is very foundational to your practice and what drives your
Mhm.
practice. I'm wondering about your practice in general and any dilemmas you think EPs face or you've faced yourself, challenges in the role, and how you've worked through those, or any advice, etc., that you have in relation to that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm pretty early on in my career, so I won't be giving people generic advice about this thing makes your life better, because I think it's so idiosyncratic to where somebody's at in their career. I think connection's really important. Connection with your colleagues and the broader EP community has been really helpful for me in my early career to encourage. Basically, that's my sort of rocket fuel, really, is to feel encouraged. And if you're going with a hopeful mindset, you might find that. But it's a hard career. I think I find it really intrinsically meaningful. I came into psychology relatively late. I did a history degree initially, and then did a conversion and was working in schools, and really some quite tough situations within a tough personal context. And I think it's about what educational psychology has helped me to realize is that the world changes one hopeful interaction after another, rather than there being a magic wand that just shifts it. I think it's that for me personally, I think there's always a bit of a want to be efficient and a want to help people make change. And that can be blinkers sometimes, and trying to stay open to learning all of the time. That's a real discipline. Be able to do that, but also be able to deliver the reports or the approaches or the communication that you've suggested that you would. So values-based practice kind of ideas from acceptance commitment therapy have been helpful for me in my practice to think about how do I bring in a sense of service alongside kind of sense of making a difference and those sort of things. So that's been helpful.
So you just mentioned, is that what you said ACT? And in what way have you found that helpful?
I mean, I find it really helpful when I'm working with trainees and I've been supervising them in practice, or when I'm working at the university. I'm trying to get people to be clear about what it is that they value and how that goes through into their day-to-day practice, because there's a lot of pressures, and thinking about how you can bring a value into something that you see as difficult to find value in. For example, report writing. If you just saw that as a administrative task that you need to do, then it's likely there's a lot of writing in this job for it to become, it deprives you of meaning. But I really draw on kind of Viktor Frankl's work and saying we can be stripped of all freedom, but we can have an attitude towards something, and we can choose our attitude to whatever's facing us. I really apply that to report writing and statutory work, which can be the kind of less sexy parts of the role. Try and say, okay, how can I make this thing that might be laborious and annoying, full of value, full of hope, full of meaning for me, so it sustains me. So trying to find that, and that really helps you be precise about what it is that you could bring into a part of the role which you find less interesting. I've also found it really helpful with children around the transition from year 6 to year 7 and trying to reestablish what they'd like to be known for and how they'd like to be communicated with, because by the time you're at the end of your primary education, people know you like the back of their hand, or think they do, and you have a very different idea about what that is. So using value cards to think about what the hierarchy of value would be for that young person, and to share that with the adults who are going to be working with them and say, these things are important to them. And you think about the language that you use with them and the feedback you give to them using those. And then that's going to feed a sense of connection, engagement, and feeling seen. So that's been really helpful for me. So it can be helpful in terms of expressing value, but also understanding values in other people and how you might engage them with that.
And I was going to ask about the when you were talking about report writing and things, what does that look like for you when you're saying you would act in that way and help you think about the values and ensure that what's important to you is captured in that process? Is that you setting off at the start and thinking, how do I want this to sound, or the language I want to use? How do I want this to feel? What does that tend to look like?
Well, is that so I guess service would be one of my big values, but I'd hope would be the other one. How can this report facilitate the genuine views and hopes of the young person and their family and the staff that working with them towards a better future? So just keeping those two things in mind, as well as doing the sort of kind of administrative things to do, but just trying to keep those voices central. So although it might be a report which is really for the local authority,
Yeah.
the young person's voice is in there.
Yeah. Yeah, you reminded me of something I used to do, which was like at the top of the page, it's almost like a little mini abstract of just how I wanted it to feel, or where I thought the psychology in the situation was, and to try and make sure that is held in the report so it doesn't feel too descriptive. It's almost like a capture of, obviously it's capture of your assessment, but it includes the psychology in it as well, and a sense of hope and a sense of direction. And your values, that these are underpinning how I want this report to be received and how accessible I want it to be.
So Colin Newton, who I interviewed about PATH, talks about processes providing a portraiture of a person. So a real sense of authenticity about not talking about them as a label or a problem. It's about they're human with strengths and gifts. They can offer this process, and they're not a patient. They're a person who can develop things in their life. And if I can access the views of what they want, I can infer it from the behavior that I observe. I'll put that in there. Whatever I do needs to be authentic to this person. So they pick it up in 5, 10, 2 years time. They're like, okay, that's where I was. It helped me on this journey. It's not the be all and the end all.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a real skill to writing that way, isn't there? I think.
I do struggle with that.
It's an art, isn't it? It's part of it, I think.
Also trying to make sure that when I'm saying parent views, it is both parents, if possible. My thesis research was on fathers' involvement in their development. Fathers are often left out of that conversation. And so just things like emailing the dad, even if he can't come to the meeting, or mum doesn't want him to come to the meeting, saying part of your parental responsibility is to be able to be part of the conversation about what happens to your child. So being consistent. If I'm meeting with the mum in person, ask the same questions virtually to dad. And so I can synthesize those. And often they're similar, but they might see different parts of the child in different ways. So it's just about keeping those things live and thinking, this is making a difference, even if it's about having the voices of people genuinely in there and trusting in their expertise about what would work in their life. So not making just the research says this provision would work. That, well, okay, the research evidence might say that, but what does the contextual evidence, practice-based evidence say about that? That's how I guess that's how I'd approach all my work in the written parts of it. I'd want that to be in there as well.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe our last question is, so you'll have spoken to, well, I know you've spoken to many interesting, insightful people in the podcast, and out with that too, I'm sure. I'm wondering if there are any key conversations or points raised that really stuck with you or were transformative in their meaning. It can be anything that comes to mind, maybe a particular point someone made, or just the nature of a conversation that felt like that really stuck with me. That made a lot of sense. If there's anything that comes to mind.
I mean, there's a few kind of key things. So if I just think of the ones that come to mind immediately, I think my first conversation with Joe Taylor, who I've become quite good friends with since that conversation, was quite transformational in terms of just finding that resonance of, here's somebody who's read the paper, who's got their own ideas and can think about how conversations and around hope can lead to new narratives. And it was like, okay, that's validation. It isn't just me. I think for me, that's a big one. And often what I see, I can forensically look at listening patterns in the data around the podcast, is that people will listen to one which piques their interest, say it's polyvagal theory with Amelia Taylor, and then go back to the first one after that, like, because the conversations make sense in a sort of linear way as well as discreetly. That person with Joe is important. I think really important for me was one with the Jagdish Barn, which I think might be the second or third one, where she talks about slow cooker systemic change and sticking with relationships for a long time. And that helped me to reflect on, I was a bit of a social justice zealot when I became a trainee, and I wanted things to happen really quickly, like a stir fry or a microwave, a systemic change kind of guy.
Yeah.
I'm right, everybody else is wrong. Change because I say so. And that
Yeah.
just
Okay.
isn't how it is in relational work. So that
Yeah.
reinforced the importance of a sort of Rogerian, non-judgmental approach
Mm.
to situations and taking the long road with stuff. You might see a young person for an extended period of time. It's likely to be short kind of bursts of interaction. But I've been with some of my Senkos and head teachers now for 5 years. And now I'm reaping the benefit of co-producing a way of understanding what an EP does. And it
Yeah.
hasn't been
Yeah.
me pushing it through. It's me pushing through, finding failure, trying something different, that resonating more. And then we'll go off and do loads of that. And I'm thinking, oh, but that didn't quite hit the needs of the young people in the family. Let's bring them more into that. Although there's lots of pressure and we want to do the best for young people, all we've got is time for our school. It might be not a lot of time, but over years, if you say, I'm hoping this relationship will be really good and I can understand what they're trying to do and they can understand what I'm trying to do, and then we can become co-travelers, then we can really do some good stuff together. But it's only by understanding their worldview, what they see as important, and not judging that and then seeing where you fit, that they'll start to see you in the same way. That I think that was an important conversation. There's a myriad of things that I could pull from any of those conversations, but
Yeah.
the slow cooker analogy was important for me, and it's what I keep in mind when I become all het up about something's gone up. But it reinforces the idea that you have to take the 5-dimensional approach over a long period of time with somebody for it to bear its fruits.
Yeah, and analogies are great, aren't they? But that idea of it's a co-production, it's co-construction of our relationship and of the work that we do together, rather than, I'm coming in as the EP and this is what I'm going to recommend and blah, 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 blah. It's seeing it as a dynamic, evolving, organic thing over time. It's a helpful reminder, isn't it, when things get busy, a bit frantic, and we just like, why is it all not going to plan?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but who gets being busy? Teachers and head teachers, for sure. I've just learned to communicate. This is going to be a busy period for me. This is what you can expect. That tends to be accepted now after 3-4 years of putting up with me.
Any kind of practice that you aspire to? Anything that you're hoping for in the future, or hoping to develop in your practice?
I'm really lucky that both in my local authority work, I'm working around some amazing psychologists and giving real freedom about developing interests around the approaches that I take. And I guess the other side of my practice is I'm really interested in the sort of trauma-informed and kind of dynamic maturational models of attachment. Not necessarily particularly hopeful approaches, but I think they can help give people clarity on what might be going on. That I'm really interested in forensic psychology and all of those sort of things. So I like to take a broad sweep. It's just the positive, hopeful stuff. Those things exist in attention. And I just, it'd be great to kind of come to a sense of an integrated way of practicing. And I think I look at different approaches that psychologists take. So family therapy, particularly, as an approach that I'd like to maybe train in and integrate into the role at some point, because I think there is a gap there in the English system about working out what's going on in the family dynamic, rather than trying to do that through the prism of school, where you've got too many cooks with a particular broth. So there's things I'd like to develop. And then obviously it's Newcastle Uni, I'm working with amazing trainees who have a huge amount of depth of expertise and experiences and really interesting points of views. And then a group of tutors who A, trained me, and B, are wonderful human beings who have done great things academically. So I think there's lots of people to aspire to be like. It'd also be nice to get that work-life balance in and all of those sort of things, and be a human as well as a psychologist. And there's loads of things that I'd love to do, but I'm going with the journey at the moment. I'm trying to relax into it and be more comfortable being me, actually, more than being trying to judge who I should be. Who am I? And who am I outside of practice and in practice? Because I have my partner is also an educational psychologist, and she is brilliant at being who she is at home and at work. I tend to have to put on the Dr. Tim Cox hat when I'm in practice. I'm trying to let people see other parts of me. A scary but nice shirt.
Absolutely. It's reminding me of, in the last episode that we did actually with Sarah Philp, she was really talking about the importance of, and so was Jen in the first episode actually. It's funny how the themes come through of knowing yourself and that process of actually trying to integrate the professional and the person. We can only be our own psychologist, and half, I guess, the process of getting to that point for meander and can take us in different directions, but probably is a really important one.
Which I think is why it's important to talk about it and
absolutely
have those safe conversations with people about where you're sitting with things at the moment.
Yeah. And what you said about work-life balance, I think, I'm sure it's the same in England, but in Scotland at the moment, I think it's always been the case, but EPs are very busy people, as are everyone else who works with children and young people. But I think it is something that we really think about. I think that one of the a value that psychologists bring is our ability to be able to think and formulate and step back from a situation. And that does take a certain kind of state, I think, doesn't it? And we need to be careful that's getting what it needs.
Yeah. I think it's very easy for us to not apply the questions that we'd ask as a matter of course to other people, to ourselves. I always keep that, what would I like my life to be like for myself? That's something that I've had to move from of value to other people, to thinking about what would be valuable to me, what would my life be like, and how can I be less stressed about all of these things all the time? Because until you sit and know where you are with it, I think it's hard to do.
Yeah. It can run away with us a bit, can't it? Just things can run away with us if we're not got a bit of a check on it.
For sure.
Yeah. It's definitely something for us all to be keeping in mind, I think, isn't it? Oh, many things that you mentioned there that I would love to get into more detail with, but we're out of time for today. The maturation of thinking around brain development and trauma-informed would be something that would be great to have a follow-up conversation about at some point in particular. But I am respectful of your time. Was there anything else that you thought you would quite like to say before we finished off that we've not got to?
I think, like I said, I think we could talk all day about these things, but if there's anybody who's interested in hope-informed practice, this is one of my long-term goals, is to write a paper up of the 5
absolutely.
And I'd really love to hear from Scottish educational psychologists and trainees what they think of it. And these things are always jumping off points, so developing it further would be really great.
Yeah. We'd love to be able to support with any of that. Yeah. So if there is anything that you can think of that in ways that we could do, that would be really great. Thank you so much for your time, Tim. I know you're busy and you've had a busy day as well, and just really nice to connect with you. And hopefully we can connect again in the future and have more discussions. That would be really nice.
That's good.
Thanks so much for listening. I hope that this has stimulated some reflections around where we do or do not see hope in education and what we think about that. You can find Tim on Twitter or X at TimCEducation. Thanks again.